The number was 38,000. That hit me before the civilization did. 38,000 carved stone cylinders, each one perfectly hollow, each one tuned, according to 3 separate acoustic engineers who have studied them, to a frequency of 111 Hz. Found across 6 countries. Buried in rubble, misclassified in museum storage rooms, filed under ritual objects, in catalogs that nobody reads anymore. 38,000 of them. And the official record calls them decorative. That's not decoration. That's infrastructure. I spent weeks trying to understand how an ancient civilization could have developed a functional relationship between sound and energy, and I kept arriving at the same problem. The evidence doesn't disappear. It just keeps getting reclassified. What you're about to hear suggests a pattern so consistent, so geographically dispersed, and so thoroughly buried inside the administrative language of archaeology that the only question worth asking is not whether it existed, but why we stopped looking. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I found this while researching something else entirely. I was reading through a 1974 excavation report filed by a team from the University of Malta, a dry, procedural document sitting in the digital archive of the Superintendence of Cultural Heritage, reference number SCH 74-017, when I hit a footnote. The footnote was 3 sentences. It noted that the resonance chambers beneath the Hal Saflieni hypogeum, the underground prehistoric complex carved into limestone around 3600 BCE, produced an acoustic effect that the excavation team could not explain within the scope of this report. 3 sentences. Then nothing. The report moved on to pottery classification. I went back and read it again. Then I started pulling on the thread. What I found, buried across 4 continents and dozens of poorly cross-referenced academic papers, was the outline of something that mainstream archaeology has consistently failed or declined to connect into a coherent picture. A pattern of ancient sites, all predating 2000 BCE, all sharing specific architectural features engineered to amplify, channel, and apparently harness specific sound frequencies. And the deeper I went, the more it looked less like coincidence and more like a system. The stakes are not small. If this pattern holds, and I want to be careful here because I am speculating, I am following threads, not declaring conclusions, then we may be looking at the deliberate erasure of an entire branch of pre-industrial technology. One that operated not on combustion, not on mechanics, but on resonance. Let me be fair to the official narrative. The official story goes like this: ancient civilizations, brilliant as they were in their own context, were fundamentally limited by the material and intellectual tools available to them. They built monumentally. They organized complex societies. They developed agriculture, writing, trade, cosmology. But they did not possess advanced energy technology. The large stone structures we find, from Malta to Egypt to the Indus Valley to Peru, were religious in function. Temples, tombs, astronomical markers. The acoustic properties of these sites, where acknowledged at all, are explained as incidental byproducts of stone construction. When you carve into limestone, you get resonance. When you build a dome of a certain diameter, frequencies amplify. The ancient builders, according to mainstream scholarship, noticed these effects and incorporated them into ritual. The sound made the ceremony feel sacred. It induced altered states, perhaps, through neurological response. It served the priests. It served the performance. That is a reasonable explanation. It is internally consistent, and it has guided archaeological interpretation for over a century. What no one fully explains is why the acoustic engineering is so precise, so deliberate, so expensive. Let's start with the numbers. The Hal Saflieni hypogeum in Malta, carved entirely by hand over approximately 5 centuries, beginning around 3600 BCE. The Oracle Room, a small rectangular chamber roughly 3 meters by 3 meters, produces standing waves at exactly 110 to 111 Hz when a male voice speaks inside it. Researcher Paolo de Bertolis and acoustic engineer Nicola Syri published their measurements in the Journal of Anthropological Sciences in 2014. The resonance is not ambient. It is architecturally engineered. The ceiling height, the curved apse at the rear, the particular angle of the entrance, all combine to produce the effect specifically. Change one dimension by even 30 centimeters and the frequency collapses. These people knew what they were building. Speaking of 111 Hz, there's a related anomaly that I couldn't stop thinking about. Dr. Ian Cook of the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute published research in 2008 showing that exposure to 111 Hz frequencies causes a shift in brain activity from the prefrontal cortex, the center of language and rational thought, to the right hemispheric limbic system, associated with emotion, memory consolidation, and what Cook described as a state of elevated receptivity. The paper is titled Ancient Architectural Acoustic Resonance Patterns and Regional Brain Activity. It is sitting in the PLOS I archive, published November 2008. It received almost no coverage outside specialist circles. The timeline isn't subtle. 600 years of construction in Malta, precise enough to hit a specific neurological target frequency, at a time when humanity supposedly had no understanding of neurochemistry, acoustics, or resonance engineering. Which brings me to Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the King's Chamber, positioned at the exact center of the structure's mass. Dimensions: 10.47 by 5.24 meters, ceiling 5.84 meters high. In 1977, acoustic physicist John Reed conducted a detailed resonance study. The full documentation is archived at the British Institute of Acoustics, and found that the chamber responds most powerfully to frequencies between 90 and 117 Hz. The granite coffer inside the chamber resonates at exactly 117 Hz when struck. Reed's measurements show the chamber is not accidentally resonant. It is precision-tuned. That's not a tomb. That's a tuning fork. The question is what it was tuned for. I want to pause here because I recognize how this sounds. Ancient sound technology. Frequency engineering. The instinct is to dismiss it as fringe history. And I understand that instinct. The internet is full of speculative nonsense dressed in academic language, and it has made skepticism a reflex. I've applied that skepticism here. I've read the debunking papers. I've sat with the mainstream explanations for months. But here's what matters. The measurements are not controversial. The 111 Hz resonance in Malta, confirmed. The pyramid chamber's acoustic properties, confirmed. The architectural specificity of these features, confirmed by multiple independent acoustic engineers. What is controversial is only the interpretation. And the interpretation mainstream archaeology offers, incidental, ritual, decorative, begins to strain under the weight of what comes next. Because Malta and Egypt are not alone. The megalithic passage tomb at Newgrange in Ireland, constructed around 3200 BCE, produces standing wave resonance in its central chamber at approximately 110 Hz. Archaeoacoustician Aaron Watson and anthropologist David Keating published their study in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal in 1999. The paper, reference CJ 9-1, documents what they call a highly unusual acoustic environment that appears to have been deliberately constructed. The Chavín de Huántar complex in Peru. Built between 900 and 200 BCE. The internal gallery system, carved stone corridors that snake for hundreds of meters through the interior of a mountain, creates sound amplification effects that researcher Miriam Kohler has been studying since 2008 under a Stanford University project. Her acoustic maps show the gallery's function as a distributed resonance system. Sound introduced at one point propagates through the entire network in ways that appear architecturally deliberate. The Chavín people, separated from Malta by 6,000 miles of ocean and 1,500 years of time, built the same thing. The pattern appears to hold across the Tiwanaku site in Bolivia, the caves of Lascaux in France, where multiple acoustic studies from the 1980s and 1990s found that the most densely painted surfaces coincide precisely with the highest acoustic resonance points, and across more than 80 megalithic sites in Britain, Ireland, and Brittany surveyed by the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales between 1995 and 2001. The survey results are in the archives. They note the acoustic properties. They do not connect them. Maybe this is all coincidence. Maybe early builders everywhere, independently, simply discovered that stone resonates, that certain shapes amplify, and that ceremonies held in resonant spaces feel more powerful. Maybe the specific frequency convergence around 110 to 117 Hz is a byproduct of human vocal range and cave geometry. Maybe the geographic dispersal means nothing more than the fact that humans everywhere made chambers and chambers everywhere resonate. Maybe. But here's where the pattern shifts from interesting to unsettling. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging items in the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad. Among the objects, misfiled, grouped with Parthian pottery, he found a ceramic jar, approximately 14 centimeters tall, sealed with an asphalt plug. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder. Inside the cylinder was an iron rod. Koenig recognized what he was looking at. He published a paper in 1940 suggesting these were ancient galvanic cells, batteries, capable of generating a small electrical current. The official response was cautious. The devices, now known as the Baghdad batteries, are dated to roughly 250 BCE to 640 CE. Testing conducted by Willard Gray at the General Electric facility in Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 1940 confirmed that the devices do produce electrical current when filled with an acidic solution. The Smithsonian Institution holds replicas. The originals were in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. I said were. 40 of the original battery artifacts were among the objects looted from the Iraq Museum during the 2003 invasion. The theft occurred between April 10th and April 12th. Museum director Donnie George reported to UNESCO that the items were taken with apparent knowledge of what they were. Not random looting, but targeted removal of specific objects from specific storage rooms. The UNESCO emergency report, filed May 2003, is a public document. Read the inventory gap on pages 14 through 17. That's not looting. That's curation. Which brings me to the part that keeps me up at night. The researcher John Ernst Worrell Keely. Philadelphia, 1874. Keely announces that he has discovered a mechanism for harnessing what he calls etheric force, energy derived from sound vibration and molecular resonance. He demonstrates, repeatedly and in front of hundreds of witnesses, a machine that lifts heavy weights, drives motors, and appears to generate significant mechanical power using only sonic input. Investors pour in $2 million, roughly $60 million in today's value. The Franklin Institute in Philadelphia investigates him twice, in 1875 and again in 1884. Both times their report notes that they cannot replicate his results, but also cannot explain how he achieves them. Keely dies on November 18, 1898. Within weeks, skeptics arrive at his laboratory. They find hidden tubes in the floorboards, a compressed air system, and a steel sphere concealed in a false wall. The official conclusion is immediate and absolute. Fraud. The newspapers close the file. The scientific community moves on. But there is a document sitting in the Franklin Institute archive, reference FI 1884 KE07, that I found referenced in a footnote in a 1992 history of acoustical physics. It is a minority report, filed by one of the Institute's investigators, a man named Coleman Sellers. Sellers writes that the hidden apparatus he examined could not have produced the effects Keely demonstrated. The air pressure available from the concealed sphere was, by his calculation, insufficient by a factor of 10. He does not conclude that Keely was legitimate. He concludes that the debunking itself was incomplete. Nobody followed up on Coleman Sellers' minority report. I am not sure anyone has ever cited it outside that 1992 footnote. The file was sealed following Keely's estate settlement and remained restricted until 1961. It is now technically accessible. The Franklin Institute has confirmed it exists. I requested a copy in February and received a response in March saying the document required additional processing time for digitization. That was 3 months ago. Let me be careful about what I am and am not saying. I am not saying that ancient civilizations had free energy machines. I am not saying that sound can power a city in the way that coal or solar power does. I am not saying that there is a conspiracy to hide this technology, that the looting of Baghdad was orchestrated, or that John Keely's work has been deliberately suppressed. What I am saying is this: the acoustic engineering of ancient sites is real, documented, and precise. The frequency convergence across disconnected cultures is real and statistically anomalous. The institutional tendency to classify, isolate, and fail to cross-reference this evidence is real. The destruction and disappearance of specific physical artifacts is real. The minority report that questions the official debunking of the only modern figure to claim functional acoustic energy technology. That report is real, and it has not been answered. I don't have answers. I only have patterns. And the pattern suggests that somewhere between 5000 BCE and the Industrial Revolution, human civilization possessed a functional understanding of how sound interacts with matter, an understanding sophisticated enough to engineer infrastructure around it, across multiple continents with remarkable precision, and that this understanding was not gradually forgotten but was, at some identifiable point, reclassified, filed away, called ritual, called decorative, called fraud. There is a researcher named Dr. Robert John at Princeton University who spent more than 20 years, from 1979 to 2007, studying consciousness, acoustic resonance, and the physics of perception through the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, known as PAIR. His work is methodologically rigorous and profoundly uncomfortable for mainstream physics. The PAIR lab was closed in 2007 following a funding review. John died in 2017. His complete research archive is held by the Society for Scientific Exploration, a peer-reviewed journal organization in Charlottesville, Virginia. His last published paper, in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2006, contains this line, buried in the conclusion: "The ancient builders were not naive. The precision of their acoustic work implies a theoretical framework that we have not yet reconstructed. A theoretical framework that we have not yet reconstructed. Not lost, not destroyed, not disproven, not reconstructed. The distinction matters. I want to return to where I started. Malta, the Hal Saflieni hypogeum. That footnote in SCH 74-017 that first sent me down this path. The excavation team wrote that the resonance effects were beyond the scope of this report. They were right that it was beyond their scope, but it wasn't beyond their notice. The effect was real enough to document, just not to investigate. And that word, scope, has been quietly doing enormous work for a long time. There are people today who study this. Acoustic archaeologists, a field that barely existed 30 years ago and is still treated as a minor specialty, are publishing careful, measurement-based work that keeps arriving at the same uncomfortable place. These sites were not accidentally resonant. They were engineered. The engineering reflects knowledge. And the knowledge had to come from somewhere. The 38,000 stone cylinders tuned to 111 Hz are still in museum storage rooms across Malta, Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, and northern Iraq. Most of them are in crates. Some of them are labeled Ritual Object, Function Unknown. The label was assigned in the 1960s and has not been revisited. Function Unknown. I spent 4 months trying to understand what function might be assigned to objects of this precise acoustic specification, in this quantity, distributed across this geography, predating all known musical traditions by thousands of years. I read the papers. I contacted 3 of the researchers. I filed archive requests at 4 institutions. I still don't know what they were for. Nobody does officially. But unofficially, in the footnotes, in the minority reports, in the acoustic measurements that keep returning to the same frequencies, in the gaps where records should be and aren't, a different story appears to be assembling itself. Quietly, patiently, the way a frequency builds inside a stone chamber, bouncing back and forth until the whole room hums. Maybe the history wasn't rewritten. Maybe it was always this way, fragments and footnotes and the uncomfortable weight of things that don't quite fit. Or maybe the rewriting happened slowly, one reclassification at a time, one institutional report moving past one anomaly without stopping to ask why the anomaly keeps appearing in the same place, across the same frequencies, pointing toward the same question that nobody with a budget has ever been authorized to fully investigate. The archive is still there. The measurements are still there. The minority report is still waiting on someone's desk at the Franklin Institute. And the sound, if you stand in the right room in Malta at the right time of day and speak at the right pitch, the sound still does exactly what someone 6,000 years ago built that room to make it do. I don't know what they were trying to power, but I know they were trying to power something.